boldly. Keep on loving boldly. Keep on loving boldly. Never turning back, never turning back. Gonna keep on moving forward. Keep on moving forward. Keep on moving forward. Never turning back. Never turning back.
Hello, everyone at the pond. Hello. Welcome. Everyone getting seated. My name's Melissa. I'm Vice President at the Gay and Lesbian Archives of the Pacific Northwest. I'm going to keep this intro real short because we have lots of speakers tonight. But I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping. I want to say thank you to all of the GLAPN members who've been a part of this project for many months. GLAPN is an all-volunteer organization, and we've been meeting weekly since January to put on about 5 months and 5 programs that this is just the kickoff of. And so yeah, I have a lot of gratitude for that committee that's been meeting weekly and putting a lot of sweat and energy into this. And I also want to thank the panel of guests, Kathleen Sadat, Ramon Ramirez, Pat Young, and Anna Galisky, as well as Holly Pruett and Ian. Thank you so much for all of your support. You guys are the program. I'm just so thankful for you guys agreeing to do this and trusting in GLAPN to carry this really important story. Lastly but not least, as I mentioned, GLAPN is an all-volunteer organization, but we do have some supporters who created a generous matching pool. So if folks want to become members tonight or donate, your donations or memberships will be matched dollar for dollar up to $3,500. Thanks to Bill Dickey and Terry Bean and Morel Inc. And we're really thankful for their support. Memberships are $35 and they're for a year, and you can come hang out with us on Zoom or the Q Center or wherever we meet. And I think that's it. So I'm going to let Ian take charge. Again, thank you, Ian, so much. Ian is the Executive Director at Q Center. He's been rocking it for about 2 years, most of which has been through COVID. So a lot of folks haven't had a chance to meet Ian, but we at GLAPN are really thankful for his leadership. So.
Thank you so much, Melissa. And yes, matching grants are a beautiful thing. So if you got that $35 tonight, I know there's about 100 RSVPs. So between the folks here, those who are out in virtual world, let's help them reach that goal. Can I get an amen? Amen. All right. So I got RuPaul up in here. Now to things a little bit more serious. One practice that is done in just about all spaces that actually care about the history of the United States is the acknowledgement of stolen lands. And that manifests in many different ways. And it is only the very first step, and a tiny step, in starting to try to right some wrongs to the original folks who were living here in the United States. I will read the acknowledgement that I have prepared, and then I'd like to leave about 20 to 30 seconds if there are folks in the room who would like to declare, proclaim their own tribal affiliation. I want to make sure there's room for that. And for anything that someone of Indigenous, Native identity might be feeling, we want to make sure that there's room for that. We acknowledge that this physical space and all meeting locations in the United States, which have mostly, historically, predominantly served white cisgender community members, are constructed on stolen Native lands. And what we now know is the Portland metropolitan area covering both sides of the Columbia and Willamette rivers were the traditional homelands of the Multnomah, Wasco, Cowlitz, Cathlametet, Clackamas, bands of Chinook, Tualatin, Quillapaya, Molalla, and many other tribes who made their homes along the Columbia and Willamette rivers since time immemorial, and who were located to the Grand Ronde Reservation under the Qualiquia, etc., 1855 ratified treaty, also known as the Willamette Valley Treaty, 1855. Today, these tribes are part of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde. The Grand Ronde people continue to maintain a connection to their ancestral homelands and maintain their traditional cultural practices. Let us also acknowledge the robust present-day tribes who fought for and still fight for federal recognition, creating a modern urban indigenous community which represents more than 380 tribes. And let us recognize that acknowledging tribes is only the first step. The next steps are to work to include Native people in our policy, funding, and equity processes. And again, if there's anyone who would like to proclaim, declare, we're going to make some room for that. All right, y'all, we've got work to do, and we're going to do it. So, a few more things before we introduce our first speaker. We do want to be aware that we're going to be digging in some deep stuff tonight. There's going to be a lot of things that will pull up memories for folks who are in this room. We're going to see a lot of parallels to what we're facing today. If you need a moment, this back patio area is ours, so we want to make sure that you know if you need to step out for a moment, compose yourself, take a moment to process things, please do that. Whenever we end the program, the circular tables in the back will be for our seniors, especially ones who have mobility issues, so enjoy them now, enjoy your meals, but at the end of the panelist program, we'll ask for those seats to be prioritized for folks during the social hour because it's kind of hard to socialize in these seats. We have a couple more thank yous. We wanted to thank Don't Shoot PDX for their donation to GLAPN to run this program. So we appreciate that. Thank you so much. And that's all I really have for the moment. I will remind folks, especially when our panelists come up, that we are asking as many who are able to continue honoring the masking protocols. We've got a lot of living archives in this room right now, and we really want to put their health as paramount as we do this program tonight. But I'm really excited to bring to the podium Holly Pruett, who is going to be introducing the program No on 9 Remembered, an amazing digital resource, and I can't wait to hear more about it. So Holly, come on up.
I understand the projector may need a few minutes to wake back up. Oh, there we are. So good to see so many familiar faces, even if we're incognito behind the mask. But I want you to look around and see how many of you here were part of the fight against Measure 9 30 years ago. Wow. So good to be together again. And how many of you heard about Measure 9 and the group that sponsored it, the Oregon Citizens Alliance, OCA? It's okay to hiss when I say that, if you like. Thank you. How many heard about it for the first time in conjunction with this 30th anniversary? Anybody? A couple of you. It is so good to have you here. And anybody in the middle, maybe you weren't here 30 years ago, maybe you weren't alive 30 years ago, but this is not the first time you've heard of Measure 9. Okay, thank you. Well, for those in the first group, this is, as Ian said, a very, very personal issue, but I suspect that for all of you who weren't part of the fight then, that you likely came tonight because you know that the fight is not over, and that the struggle to defend and achieve an inclusive democracy that respects everyone's rights is personal for everyone here too. Can I get a amen and hallelujah to that too? I'm here tonight on behalf of Western State Center, which was one of the many nonprofit and community organizations that jumped into the fight against Measure 9 30 years ago. And last year, the center's executive director, Eric Ward, suggested that we do something to honor the big anniversary, given that lessons from that time could well be relevant to the troubles we're facing today. And it's been a bit scary how much the relevance has increased every day. That resulted in this historical memory project, No 9 Remember, that I'm going to breeze through by way of introduction to what Measure 9 was and some of how we defeated it in a year when a majority of Colorado voters actually approved a similar anti-gay measure. Eric was really sorry not to be here tonight, but some of the words that he's offered set the stage. We have to become a movement, Eric says, that understands the long arc of history. Learning from earlier struggles teaches us discipline and helps prevent the sin of despair. In a time where some seek to erase or deny our nation's history, remembering the stories that are part of the movement for inclusive democracy is a powerful act of resistance and redemption. There's a picture of Eric back then. Eric's a straight black man who was living in Eugene during the Measure 9 campaign. He'd moved there from the punk scene in Southern California as an act of survival. And he says his involvement in the No 9 effort was, quote, the first time since I moved to this nearly all-white state and town that I felt like I was part of a large community. And it was the most diverse community I could be a part of in Oregon. The LGBTQ community, Eric says, it took the horror of the Oregon Citizens Alliance and gave something back to Oregon that was beautiful and powerful. I never spent so many nights out dancing, Eric says. There was such an embrace of life. We weren't just shut down by the horror. I would have done almost anything for that movement. People would call me homophobic slurs for years afterwards in rural areas where I traveled to speak, accusing me of running the secret homosexual agenda. I considered it a point of pride, he says. And here you have a picture of me from back then at the 1993 March on Washington for Lesbian and Gay Rights with my mom and my grandma, who was an anti-fascist emigre from Italy in World War II. And my thoughts, remembering the No 9 campaign and all 35 of the Oregon Citizens Alliance hateful measures is a best of times, worst of times roller coaster. Courage is there, so much courage and terror, and community like we'd never experienced, along with many painful rifts. No 9 showed us what we could achieve when we unite against hate and how far we still had to go. So let's talk about what Measure 9 actually was, who's behind it, and the multiplicity of efforts that mobilized 56% of Oregon voters to defeat what's become known to history as one of the most comprehensive and harshest anti-gay measures put to voters in Oregon history. So here is the actual text of the measure as it appeared in the voters' pamphlet mailed to every voting household. The question before Oregon voters. The actual ballot question: shall the Constitution be amended to require that all governments discourage homosexuality, other listed behaviors, and not facilitate or recognize them? Government cannot facilitate and must discourage homosexuality and other behaviors. We'll talk about those other behaviors in a moment. So how did this get on the ballot? Initiative petitions are a form of direct democracy, actually part of a package of progressive reforms from the very early 20th century, instituted in Oregon in 1902. About half of the states have the ability for voters to bypass the legislature and directly enact legislation or even amend the Constitution. Sponsors have to collect a designated number of valid signatures by a particular time, and while the signatures are circulating, it's called an initiative petition. And then once the required number of valid signatures have been submitted and it's certified for the ballot, it's called a ballot measure. Thus we have the ballot measure 9. The only legal review in Oregon tradition has to do with technicalities, not substance. So even a measure that will ultimately be overturned by the courts or the legislature, like the OCA's Measure 8 from 1988 and the many local Sons of Nines that passed after 1992, they have to first go to a very costly vote of the people. And what that means is for sponsors of measures like this, they can be used as much for building movement and shaping culture as for actually establishing law. They may not even care that much about establishing law. So remember, 30 years ago, this is before social media, before even widespread use of the internet or email. So introducing a divisive ballot measure was a great way to raise money, to amass a mailing list, to build statewide organization, and to frame the terms of the debate. So what would Measure 9 actually do? And again, from the voters' pamphlet statement, it would in part prohibit any anti-discrimination statutes or ordinances, prohibit the expenditure of public funds for sensitivity training, prohibit the free use of government property for promotions, rallies, or parades, which would mean, for example, the chief of police and gay officers marching in a gay pride parade, which was a big part of the effort, any programming in libraries, prohibit the employment in government, including public schools, of individuals whose job duties place them with kids. And this was understood to mean anyone who was queer and out would lose their job. If they worked in the public sector, absolutely. But in the private sector, there could be no prohibition against discrimination there. And the details of the measure also included pedophilia, sadism, masochism, equating homosexuality with these sexual or other behaviors, even necrophilia and bestiality in the earlier versions. Of course, it was meant to build off of homophobia. And remember, this was the height of the AIDS crisis then, and America's squeamishness about sex. But let's look just a little bit more closely at some of the key phrases here too. Quotas, minority status, affirmative action, establishing the rights of citizens to challenge government protection, specifically State Department of Higher Education and the public schools. This reveals the underlying framework that targeted the civil rights of every protected or potentially protected community in a way that is playing out every day these days. And lastly, it's important to underscore that this was an unprecedented attempt to use a constitution to take away rights, much as we've just seen an unprecedented action by the US Supreme Court to have a ruling to actually take away rights. So just very briefly, this brings us to who was the OCA. I'm not going to spend much time on that. There's a lot of details in the room. But I want to answer that question mainly by talking about the context in which they were operating and how a born-again former cult member from California, Lon Mabon, came to wield so much power. So just to show you a little bit about the timeline here, we have a great deal of detail about 45 years of milestones from the founding of the first openly gay organizations in Oregon in 1970 to 2015, the year when Oregon was named the second most LGBTQ-friendly state in the nation based on all the legal protections that many in this room had won. And this details all of the OCA specific work, including those 35 ballot measures that we fought from 1978 to 2004, including here in 1986. We have the founding of the OCA in conjunction with a nearly successful religious right primary challenge to three-term U.S. Senator Bob Packwood, who was a pro-choice Republican. Also, their early dabbling in opposing statewide pre-kindergarten, parental leave legislation, and divestiture from apartheid South Africa. Their first success in 1988, passing Measure 8 to repeal an executive order that prohibited discrimination in the executive branch. Their failure in 1990 to get voters to ban abortion, and then all of the measures that followed that. But I just want to, again, underscore the bigger picture here, which is that the OCA's attack on the queer community in Oregon and the victories that we've won in this community are part of the great 19th and 20th century movements for civil rights and the backlash to the gains of those movements. And that's why we've also included, you can see the link here, a more comprehensive timeline of benchmarks in Oregon's civil rights history, which I hope you're going to spend time on when you run home and open this website. And we have also led our resource section with other historical memory projects dealing that do credit to many of the struggles of other adjacent communities. So I will come back to NOAA 9 specific resources, but very quickly, let me come to some of the stories. The OCA was one local example of the many groups that had been in ascendancy since the election of Ronald Reagan in 1980, attempting to turn back the clock on our multiracial democracy to achieve a white supremacist Christian theocracy. The religious right, the Christian right, white nationalists, far right, these are just some of the names referring to components of that movement. They were active across the country in the early 1990s, as they are today, but Oregon offered a few unique elements. First, urban centers where gay rights were becoming increasingly accepted, and vast rural regions that were really suffering in crisis economically as timber and other natural resource-based jobs collapsed. And a history in the state of excluding people of color that led groups like the Aryan Nations to target the region as a white homeland. And that's why we start NOAA 9 Remembered with the story, Act 1 in 1988, the killing of Mulugeta Sarah, an Ethiopian immigrant, by neo-Nazi skinheads on the streets of Southeast Portland. And I really encourage you to dig into this again and all of the other stories. We're just going to look at the front pages here, but to get more of the context. We then moved, besides a lot more about Ballot Measure 9 itself, to Oregon Democracy Project, which was a consortium of 4 organizations brought together by Western State Center, including the one that I was directing, the Statewide Coalition of Battered Women's Shelters and Rape Hotlines. Marcy Westerling, whose skirt I'm wearing today, Marcy, was my board chair, and it was a legendary set of road trips through the Oregon Democracy Project that led to the founding of the Rural Organizing Project, whose 30 years of work is detailed there on the wall. We then move into setting the stage in a gay bar in Eugene, which, as Scott Nakagawa, one of our storytellers, says, is one of the least known stories about Ballot Measure 9, that the first steering committee was actually elected at a gay bar in Eugene. Kathleen is verifying. And this sets the stage for the ongoing contest for control, let's say, and the multiple efforts of the, quote, official campaign that some people might call it, which Kathleen Sadat was on the steering committee of, Scott Nakagawa worked for, many others, and all of the other interrelated and parallel efforts that you're going to hear about. This is also a chance to tell a little bit more about Oregon's political and cultural geography, Portland and the rest of the state. We then move into what we consider 2 very foundational stories: the response of the Farm Workers Union and the organizing of the African American community that a number of folks in this room here were a critical part of. These stories are essential to understand both the risks that were taken and the work that remained and remains to be done to build a strong multiracial movement for everyone's civil rights in Oregon. And you're going to hear more about these 2 stories from our panel. In March, we moved into a review of the pervasive and terrifying and deadly violence of the Ballot Measure 9 campaign, from the surge in hate crime, including 2 bonus articles assessing the struggles of documenting hate crimes, with Scott Nakagawa commenting, the desecration and arson at the Catholic Church in Hillsborough, which ignited a community response going back to that history's targeting by the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan in Oregon. And finally, the devastating and tragic firebombing in Salem that killed Brian Mock, a white gay man, and Hattie Mae Cohen's, a black lesbian, on the eve of the final campaign. When we were about to post these stories, the relevance of that time of terror really came home as June Knightley, a beloved LGBTQ activist, was murdered while supporting a racial justice protest in Portland. And we knew June by her chosen name Amazon in the late 1990s when she chaired the Lesbian Community Project Board. LCP carried a very heavy load during the fights against the OCA, and their director, Donna Redwing, was one of the heroes of the campaign and one of the many visible leaders subject to death threats. Each of the stories that we featured, and there's so much here I hope you're going to look at, and the thousands more whose names we don't know, took so many risks to stand up against hate and discrimination, and are all a profile in courage. That includes members of the media. In the next month, we profiled Bob Landauer, who wrote an unprecedented 12 editorials for the Oregonian, and the publisher, who did an unprecedented front page message editorializing against Measure 9, and his background as a family that had been part of an underground railroad of Jews coming to America that helped inform his perspective on that measure. We have fantastic commentary from Just Out co-founder and publisher from that time, Renee Lachance, and Marty Davis is here, the subsequent publisher. The whole Just Out digital archives is an unbelievable resource, and we've got additional commentary from Renee that you can click to there. And finally, what it was like for a rural paper simply to report the facts and be subject to death threats. Then we move on to some of the grassroots innovators. Bob Ralphs, our bigot buster, who attempted to persuade people not to sign. People of Faith Against Bigotry, the rural activism that brought the internet and some of the first email networks to the foundation of the Rural Organizing Project. We have detailed stories from Katie Potter, who is here, about what it was like to be an out lesbian cop during that time, and her dad, the police chief, and all of the boundaries that they pushed against, with, again, bonus commentary from both of them on a lifetime of working as change agents. Asian Americans Opposing 9 was the first time that a Pan-Asian group came together in this way around queer members of their own community. If you want to think about how different things are, read about the entire mainstream Republican Party standing up against Measure 9 at that time. And finally, this month we come to the performers, satirists, and cultural organizers who helped us laugh amidst the terror and lifted our spirits and opened our hearts. One of the things that I hope you're taking from this very whirlwind tour that I'm just about to end is the incredible diversity of efforts. We're publishing 3 stories a month, and there is more to come in August, September, and October. no9remembered.org. I really hope that you'll dig into it. Those of you who were part of that time remember so well how often we quoted the German pastor Martin Niemöller. He spent 7 years in Nazi concentration camps for speaking out against Hitler, and after the war he said, "First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I didn't speak out because I was not a trade unionist. And then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. And then they came for me. There was no one left to speak for me." So before I turn it over to Ian and our panel to do a deeper dive into the lessons from this time, just a very quick peek at the No on 9 specific resources that you can find here. The 20-minute video, the feature-length video, commentary from Suzanne Farr, a national activist who was key to our fight at that time, and all of George Nicola's incredible summaries, full-length book about one of the towns, and our panelist Pat Young's full master's thesis. Also links to, at Oregon Historical Society, the boxes and boxes of material on all of this. That amazing 30 years of Just Out online. And lastly, the NGLTF Fight the Right Action Kit. I just want you to look at all the content that was contributed by Oregonians. This became a national resource. Every one of these folks that were part of our Oregon effort, bringing those lessons to the rest of the country at that time. That's just one of the legacies. Another, of course, is Basic Rights Oregon. At the time that the Oregon Citizens Alliance was using these measures to build organization, we didn't have anything comparable. The No on 9 campaign was shut down as soon as we got that victory on election day. And we knew that we would have to keep fighting all these local measures and come back again in 1994 with No on 13. The OCA basically said, thanks for helping us edit our measure. Now we have something much more reasonable to bring back. And so many of the folks in this room I had the privilege of working with to try to put together first Support Our Communities PAC, then the No on 13 campaign in a way that would lead to a campaign permanent organization. And I think we have to thank this entire legacy for having the strong organization Basic Rights Oregon that we have today. So please use the contact here to tell us your story and to sign up to connect with the next months of these stories that are coming forward. Ian?
Yes, keep that traffic going for this amazing work and Holly's amazing presentation. I think it's so important to acknowledge that we do not have to be defined by the algorithm that pushes things to us, because we have websites like yours where we can choose to find information. So coming here tonight is a first step for many of you learning about this. And I should do the leading. As we bring our panelists to the stage, I'm vamping for time, but I want to acknowledge one of the things we talked about in the green room, very fancy, is our panelists very specifically said, I hope we see some young people here tonight. Now, we all love our queer elders, and for good reason. But I'm looking at you with the pink hair. You see what's going on here. I'm looking at y'all with your full heads of your original colored hair, because this stuff is pure white under here. That's why I can give this beautiful blue color, because I done earned my gray hairs. But we need you. We need you in these spaces. We need these intergenerational conversations. And I'm gonna do a little quick shout out. First of all, of course, to Melissa, who's been holding it down. Give some love to her. And I also want to say, in the corner here, Cesar, I see you. So Cesar was at Q Center doing volunteer for another organization and heard me talking about intergenerational things and came to me with some excitement and said, oh, y'all doing intergenerational stuff? I'm there for it. The way it filled my heart to see them here tonight, taking photos and being part of this. You didn't just talk about it, you beat about it. And we want folks to be about it, so I'm saying that. Young folks, be a part of GLAPN. Such skills as you may have, when I've talked to Robin, I think we got lots of digital recordings that need to be made into videos, so if you got any kind of rudimentary graphic editing or video editing skills, bring that to the table. We need you to do some of this labor. Because a lot of these folks in these areas, they have been doing it for decades. And I'm 47, so I'm kind of in the middle of that. So I need to put that on myself too, that I need to be doing that work. But I just want to, before I become the least interesting person on this stage, because that just happened when these four came up. Oh no, it's true. Y'all are a lot more interesting than I am. I'm so excited to have them here. So.
What's his name?
What's whose name?
The photographer.
Oh, photographer Cesar. Cesar. Yes. So thank you for being here. And Melissa, again, thank you for everything that you have done to make this happen. I am so excited to introduce the panelists tonight. I had the opportunity to just get on a Zoom call with them to get to know each other a little bit. I left so edified, I cannot even tell you. So what I'm gonna do is introduce them each right now. They each have different aspects of the No on 9 campaign that they're gonna be able to illuminate. So I'm gonna be shutting up and then let them take the stage. But I will start here from the person next to me. I don't know what direction, right or left, you're looking at. This is Pat Young, who did her PSU thesis work on Measure 9. And Galisky, among many other things, one of the coordinators for the Walk for Love and Justice. What I do think that her and the next panelist should take their show on the road, because just listening to them conversate is amazing. Ramon Ramirez of PCUN, and I'm going to do my very best, is the Pineros y Campesinos Unidos del Noroeste. And furthest from me, but certainly not least, is community activist and just amazing, soulful speaker, Miss Kathleen Sadat. So what we're going to do first is we're going to just make some room for these folks to just sort of talk a little bit about what their experience was before, during, and after the Measure 9 defeat. And I can't wait to read your thesis, Dad. I'll be making copies at Q Center.
Okay, so. Okay. So in 1992, I was working full time, and I felt like I lived through ballot measure 9, right? Because it was also emotional, and we donated money and things like that. And I was reading about it in the newspapers, different organizations, whether it be African Americans voting no on 9, or the Asian groups speaking out against 9. And I decided to do my thesis on it and just sort of pull everything together. And I was kind of going, really? How hard could this be? And I had no idea about the complexity and what it took for everybody's effort to really defeat ballot measure 9. The other thing that I didn't understand until doing the research was that because we had lived through ballot measure 8, and because ballot measure 8 passed, there was more of a fear that this is possible, that the OCA could do this again. So I want to read you a quote here from Peggy Norman, who became the campaign manager of the No on 9 group. She said, "We knew from ballot measure 8 that we could lose, and that's the difference between Oregon and Colorado. They didn't have the sense of a wolf breathing on their neck. We did. Once you've been steamrolled, it's like, okay, how do we win? Well, we don't win by assuming that people will do the right thing. Sometimes you have to be creamed before figuring out that you have to put on a dynamic, hard-hitting campaign that cannot be ignored." Well, because of ballot measure 8 and some of the bad feelings about that campaign, Holly had mentioned that there were these community meetings as to how should we fight ballot measure 9. And John Baker, who was with Right to Privacy, he had commented that people were so upset about their memories of ballot measure 8 that it kind of made it difficult to get another campaign going. And Bob Rouse, who later did the Bigot Busters, those were the folks who tried to get you not to sign the petition, he was excited, and he went to one of these meetings. And I have this other quote to read from him from an interview that was on Bonnie Tinker's Love Makes a Family Radio. Because this was kind of the image that I had too about us all being united. He goes, "I always had this kind of notion in the back of my head that there was this kind of umbrella of unity over the gay community, various clubs, etc. But when I went to that very first meeting called in the state on what was to become the 9 campaign, I went there to that meeting with this perception of this umbrella of unity. But when I got there, what I saw, I had actually perceived wasn't an umbrella, but a mushroom cloud. Because of the degree of conflict among gay and lesbian groups about how to even approach fighting the religious right was just unbelievable. I mean, I couldn't believe the kinds of issues and concerns that people in the community had when we had something so uniting in common that we could still have such major conflicts. So Peggy, with the No on 9 campaign that got going, Peggy Norman was the campaign manager and Sherry Osier was the chair of the steering committee, I believe. And they raised, a lot of money. They put out ads on TV. They did speeching. They brought in panel discussions, and but one of the things, they really concentrated on getting out the vote. That was their goal, the main thing. We're going to tell people to vote no on 9. And we're not going to just assume that just because they're not interested that they will vote no on 9. Maybe they won't vote yes, but then vote no. We have to tell them that they must vote no on 9. So the other thing Peggy told me was that it was a deliberate strategy that they had Ellen Lowe be one of the main spokespersons for the campaign. Now Ellen Lowe, 30 years ago, would be like your grandmother. And she was with the, I hope I pronounced this right, Ecumenical Ministries?
Emo.
Is that it? Yeah. So they thought that this would be a really good way to have a heterosexual religious woman out there giving the message to say to people that you need to vote no on 9. And that it was a way to bring people to understanding why it was important to vote no. Well, as this went on with the No on 9 campaign, bigger and bigger, and then there were some differences of opinion of people saying, it's not gay enough, we're not reaching out to other groups. And the good thing though is the folks who had other opinions, they just didn't sit around and complain about it. They made things happen, If the Asian community wasn't really being represented from the officially No on 9 committee, well, then let's go out and make this happen. Or with Kathleen Sadat working with the African Americans voting no on 9. And then once the campaign headquarters was broken into, then more and more people were realizing how desperate this was, and they wanted to volunteer to help. So here's a comment from Peggy after the No on 9 campaign ended, when they were doing analyzing what went right or what went wrong with the campaign. So she was saying that the phone system drove everyone crazy, and we finally had to add over 20 lines, personal voicemail, and hire receptionists to approach having a functional system. We had to expand the media team from 1 to 6, plus key volunteers and dedicated telephone and fax lines. Fundraising expanded and rearranged, seeking the right mix of staff and funding projects. This produced inefficiency and embarrassment. Volunteers were recruited and both underused and abused with the workload. Record keeping was a problem all campaign long. Office management was a frail support for far too long. And when we changed office managers, the staff had a very hard time adjusting to the barrage of new rules and memos. And because we opted not to hire an assistant, the campaign manager was overworked and inaccessible during far too much of the campaign, causing bad public relations and hard feelings, and in some cases, distrust. Well, as I learned more about some of the anger and all the different ways that people wanted to fight ballot measure 9. And I talked to Renee LaChance, who is the owner and publisher of Just Out, and you have her story on your website, because she also recognized that there was this division in the community, but she wanted to keep her newspaper being neutral and not necessarily taking a side as to which one was right or wrong, and maybe there wasn't a right or wrong, just it's what people needed to do. So she would list in her newspaper all of these different ways that you could fight ballot measure 9. If you didn't want to join the No on 9 campaign, there was another one called No on Hate. The No on Hate group was perhaps a little bit more with the homosexual point of view, and they had members from the Radical Women, the Queer Nation, and Gay Republicans. So, but I mean, I have something here from, I don't know where it went. My mess here. Okay, anyhow, I'll go back to that. So I'll give you an example of a group that got together to, on their own, because they weren't seeing the ballot, that the No on 9 committee was doing this. Ed Reeves and Bonnie Tinker put together an Oregon Speak Out program. And what they wanted to do was to go around the state educating people about some of the dangers of ballot measure 9. And so they had to put together a packet of information of how do you talk to people about ballot measure 9. And Bonnie had been saying, yes, lots of people are out, and you've got your friends, and you've got some of your coworkers, but have you ever really talked to somebody who has a different opinion about the ballot measure? And you needed to be trained on how to do that. So that's what this group did. And they had something like over 100 speaking engagements. Bonnie said, we were the unofficial campaign because the official campaign was focused on the traditional get out the vote kind of activities. We felt like we needed a massive change in public opinion. We could not simply go out there and harvest votes, because if that is all we do, there aren't enough votes to harvest. So we had better work on cultivating a few and actually engage with people and try to change their minds. Ed Reeves said that, he goes, I personally felt that I could not survive this unless I stood up for myself and spoke positively about myself and my community. How much time have I used?
I'm not taking any time.
I forgot to look at my watch. I put it here, I forgot to look at it. So, yeah, that would be my main thing, is to let you know that there are all these different groups doing things, and there was a big division as to how the best way to go about it. And then there was also the divide between what worked in the city versus what worked in the rural communities. We had T. Corinne down in Southern Oregon who wanted to have people come over to her house to meet and build trust and build community. And she went about trying to find people in all the southern communities, and she worked through the AIDS support groups. That was one way that she could reach into these other communities. But she said to find a contact in Curry County took her 2 months. And when she finally did, a friend of somebody who was dating somebody who knew somebody in Curry County, so they said, okay, we found a contact. And when they had their first meeting, there were like 8 people there, which is a big deal, So at the end of the campaign, people were just so mentally and physically exhausted. There was some therapists who felt like those of us were like the walking wounded, because it was just so draining. And one of the women that I had interviewed made a comment that after the campaign, she had to realize that she had now developed kind of a prejudice against Christians, because there was all of this, Christianity, and then, you hate homosexuals, and so she had to realize to kind of break down this wall. It's like with People of Faith Against Bigotry formed because they felt that the OCA the OCA does not speak in my name. And I want to take one more quick thing before I hand it off to you. That the OCA, the things like this. Oh, sorry, okay, I got it out. Thanks. They put out a series of like 4 flyers like this that were to be, because here again we didn't have a lot of email, we didn't have the website. So this was to give to their supporters to say this is what the gay community is going to do this is why we have to vote yes on 9. And one of the most ridiculous parts of all of this is they created this little story called Billy and Chucky. And I don't know if people remember it or not, but of course, was it Billy? Which one was the heavy set guy? Okay, it must have been Chucky. Of course, you had to have the one kid that was a little heavy set, and then Billy's a little bit younger, and then Chucky would be saying, you know, come on, let's go to the fort. We can have some fun in our fort. And Billy's like a little hesitant, I don't know if we should go into the forest, you know, and be in your fort by ourselves. And Chucky's going, yeah, it's okay, it's fine now. The teachers are telling us it's okay. The newspapers are telling him it's okay. So they came up with this totally outrageous story of why you need to vote yes on 9, because if you don't, you're going to have people like Billy and Chucky going off into the woods. Okay.
Thanks for
Thank
that.
you so much. It's so amazing to hear that there are many paths to engagement and success in these campaigns. So there is a blueprint, Pat's thesis, and then we will be having copies of that available at Q Center. Also, I had 3 jobs to do, and I only did 2 of them because I got so excited about the young people. If you have questions for our panelists at the end, we've got some folks here in the back that have clipboards. Just raise your hand, get their attention, and you will write them down so that we don't have too much cross-contamination on the microphone. So they will bring them to me at the end, and then we will read the ones we have time for to the panelists. So just letting you know, if something's brewing in your mind that you are burning to ask, get a hold of one of these folks and they will give you something to write. And so now, without further ado, let me shut my mouth and get the interesting folks talking again. Come on, Ann, tell us them stories.
Well, at least there was a little bit between Billy and Chucky and me. So you've heard from Pat about all of the different things that people were doing. And I was one of those a little bit younger people who had ideas and went to the Lesbian Community Project and said, hey, how about if we do a walk across the whole state? And they said, what are you thinking? And I was on a sort of fledgling speakers bureau for the Lesbian Community Project. I talked to Donna Redwing. I feel like she is here today with us. She was all for it. But she said, you know, we need to talk to the board. So we did. I was a bit surprised how, fearful folks were about doing something so big and bold. I had participated in several long walks before. I wasn't just making this up off the top of my head. I had done 2-week walks before, and I had done almost 2 years. That's a different story from a different era. The 2-year one was 40 years ago. But I spoke with the board and persuaded them that this is something that we could do and it would work, and that we could go and reach the people of Oregon directly. We originally thought about starting at the California-Oregon border and walking the whole way. We went to speak with some lesbian activists in Grants Pass, and they said, please don't do this. Please don't do this. We're afraid that someone will get killed. And, you know, there was such a feeling that Portland activists were taking up all the oxygen and having all the ideas and putting them at risk. And so we listened to them and we said, okay, we won't do it. And they were like, what, really? You're gonna listen to us? And I said, yeah, I'm gonna listen to you because I believe you. So we decided to change it to the Willamette Valley. We walked from Eugene to Portland in June of 1992. There's a poster if you want to get involved. So one of my tasks in organizing this 150-mile walk, 2-week walk, was to find lodging, hospitality, food for up to 100 people a night. And I knew that I could do it. It's kind of a combination of sort of innocence and naivete and youthful enthusiasm, but I would go to, you know, Catholic churches. Hey, I was raised Catholic. you know, why not? Why wouldn't you do this? It was old school to even describe. I didn't even have a computer. I had an electric typewriter. It had a little memory ball, so you didn't have to use whiteout quite so much. When the walk actually happened, we had one cell phone, that we had no access to internet, and I was working from mailing lists and using a landline to call. I drove around the valley in my broken down truck, going to, for example, the Farm Workers Union, and having in-person meetings. That's how we did it. I think that's one of the reasons we were so successful, and that some of these relationships still exist. So in this task of looking for lodging, trying to find food, some of our biggest supporters were synagogues. So still grateful to this day. Some hosts said they wish they could help us, but it was too risky. And this is not just risk of rocking the boat, there was some of that, but this was actually real physical fear of retaliation. The walk, the Lesbian Community Project, the campaign, all received death threats. So the people who hosted us knew this danger. So as I was trying to find somewhere for us to stay in Woodburn, I approached the Farm Workers Union, Pecun. I found my notes. I had a box of mildewy notes in the basement. And I found some notes about my first phone meeting with Cipriano Farrell. He said the decision would need to go to the executive committee. It would be harvest time, strawberry harvest, so he wasn't sure what farm workers could do in terms of providing food. He said it was possible that we could sleep in the union hall, and if we had an evening program, it would be to learn about each other's communities. And that if we did this, mutual support would not just be theoretical, but would be based in action. Doesn't that sound like him?
Yes.
And it went to the steering committee, and Oregon's farm worker community, one of the most potentially targeted groups in our state, said yes. 30 years ago, they did this. I think the word ally has been so overused, and I think wrongly used, especially over the past few years. I learned what it meant to be an ally from the farm workers of Oregon. To be an ally to me is lifelong, life-altering, and sometimes life-risking. It's two-way, reciprocal, and it's based on trust. And when we use the word ally, I would like to challenge us to think about what are we willing to do for our ally? What are we willing to do for them? Ramon, who's sitting next to me, and Cipriano, and a big group of farm workers said yes. And they didn't say yes quietly. They came to the edge of town and they clapped us in. And I heard them and saw them from a distance doing the farm worker clap.
We had red flags.
And red flags.
About 40 of us.
And they marched us into town to the Farm Workers Union Hall, where we had dinner provided by a synagogue from Salem. I have my notes here, I'll figure out which one. And an amazing discussion between walk participants and farm workers and leadership. And Larry did a lot of translating that day, I remember. So they risked their lives to do this, to host us for one night, but this relationship didn't last one day. It has lasted till today and continues to last. And I have to say, of all my years of activism, I am the most deeply contented and moved that they said yes, and that then the queer community didn't disappear on them, that we came back, that we helped, that we participated, that we had hard discussions, but we continued our relationship. Ramon, I wonder if you want to do the unity clap with me, so you can get an idea of what it was like to be hot and tired, coming to the edge of town, not knowing this was going to happen, and see a big group of people welcome you into town. If anyone knows this, please join. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Ramon. I have lots of stories to tell, but he has more.
Thank you, Anne. What an honor, a great honor. I want to recognize a few people that are not with us today and who played a central role in the walk against Measure 9. One of them is Cipriano Ferrer, who passed away like 2 or 3 years later after the march, but was the real visionary behind us developing the relationship between the LGBTQ community and the farm workers. Marcy Westerling, the founder of the ROP, the Rural Organizing Project, who was a partner of mine for many, many years. We did a road show all the way across the country, went to many, many cities, talking about how do we build kind of long-lasting coalition building. And also down at Red Wing and the community, the Lesbian Community Project. I was one of the early, in fact, I was the first chair of the board person of MRG, the McKinsey River Gathering. So I had, we were the early funders of the Lesbian Community Project, so I knew a lot of what was going on. And a good friend of ours, Elizabeth Waters, was also a member of the board of directors of the McKinsey River Gathering. That was back in the 80s. So, or no, 70s and then the early 80s. So I want to recognize their contributions also. But I want to set the context for this. Woodburn is in the heart of the Willamette Valley. It's a farm worker, rural community with about 27,000 people. We are a Latino majority town, one of the first, there's several now across the state of Oregon, but we were Latino majority then. It's been always Republican controlled, and it's controlled by the growers. Agricultural interests in the Oregon is, at that time in 1992, was very, very powerful. And I personally seen Lon Maybaum many times. In fact, he lived across the street from a field that we went on strike on, that Bitcoin went on strike back in 1991. It was between Markham and Monitor, Oregon. And so, and he came out, and that's how we recognized, we say, hey, that's Lon Maybaum, right? And sure enough, it was him. I remember that at a staff meeting, Cipriano said that he was going to call the executive committee of the board of directors together to make a decision on whether we were going to support the walk or not. And a lot of us, I was vice president of the union at the time, but I was also a lead organizer. And for us, it was a no-brainer. That we talked about our early discussions was that we couldn't just be for the rights of farm workers, right? That we needed to be for the rights of everyone, right? And that we did a detailed analysis of the ballot measure that you've seen up there, and all over that, right? All you needed to take the words gay and lesbian and put immigrant farm workers in there, right? Because that's what they were trying to do. So we were next. So Cipriano was very aware that we were next, that this was not only about building support but this was actually about protecting our interests also. And that, we don't have critical mass like Latinos and African Americans, Asian Americans, Native Americans. We don't have critical mass. So we have to build alliances with other folks in other communities. But there was something wrong that was happening, is that up to 1992, there wasn't much discussion or dialogue between the farm working community, the immigrant community, and the gay and lesbian community, and the LGBTQ community. And in fact, the situation in rural Oregon, as Ann was pointing out, was really, there was a lot of stuff going on, a lot of attacks. The Aryan Nation was on the rise. There was we have the Silver Dragons of the Ku Klux Klan in Silverton. The Posse Comitatus was in Mount Angel, which is only 6 miles from Woodburn. These are armed right-wing groups, right? We've encountered them on the picket lines, right? And they have shot at us. They have tried to drive us off the road. Many times I got driven off the road a couple of times in Silverton and Mount Angel. And so, that's why we decided that when the marchers were going to come in, actually about 2 miles out of town, that's where we met the marchers. And there was about 40 people volunteered, and we took our red flags and our red jackets. Because people respected the red jackets, right? Because they had their lettering behind the jackets were Pecun. And Pecun was a militant, very well organized farm worker union that wasn't going to take any shit from anybody. And that we were going to defend our brothers and sisters, right? And that's what we were there for, was to defend our gay brothers and sisters who had the same rights that we did and was fighting for the same thing that we did, respect and dignity. And so we went out there with our red flags, and it was kind of windy that day, and so we marched them into town because we felt a responsibility that we could not let anything happen to the marchers. And we walked in, and I remember that our hall was full of people, and so the marchers were going to stay there. People are bringing in food, and we said after we're gonna have a dialogue. And the dialogue was about, where has the gay and lesbian community been for the last 30 years around farm worker rights? Because we all have a lot of in our community. We all have a lot of gay and lesbian people in the closet, right? And so part of what we learned in support of farm workers is that, if there is not people there supporting you, right, you're gonna stay in the closet, right? Especially in rural Oregon. So we had that dialogue, right? Because what we wanted to build, and that's what was good about Cipriano, was we didn't want to build a relationship that was gonna be about an inch deep. We wanted to go further, right? We wanted to build a lasting relationship. And so it was important to talk to the marchers, to let them understand while we had similarities, we wanted to talk about our differences, in order to build that long-lasting relationship. And that differences is that, we're heavily Catholic Church influenced, right? Being gay or being lesbian is bad in our community, right? Being Latino, Latinx, we had to deal with homophobia a lot in our community. And that the marchers needed to understand that, but that we were willing to take a risk. We were willing to put our reputation and our credibility on the line in our own community to defend our brothers and sisters in ways that nobody else had done it, right? We had, during that staff meeting, Cipriano said, we would probably be the only church, we would probably be the only organization sponsoring the marchers. Nobody wanted to sponsor the marchers, nobody wanted to host the marchers. We would be the only people, right? So we went with the decision to support the march and host the marchers. And we had the dialogue, and the dialogue was beautiful. And what was beautiful was that a lot of people stepped up to the plate, and they recognized that they had been absent, and that they were willing, a lot of people, individuals said, I want to make up for that. Just like we have to make up for a lot of things that have happened in the past, right? You know, and I believe truly that we are not responsible for what happened in the past, but we are responsible for the present and the future, right? So, and it was great. I remember that afterwards meeting Anne, who I've had a relationship for her 30 years, and a bunch of other folks, right? When Marcy Westerling, right after that, she formed ROP, and we've had a long-lasting relationship with ROP and with Basic Rights of Oregon. And so after the defeat, it was a major victory for us too. Right after that, we had four, what we feared became reality. We had 4 anti-immigrant measures come to the state of Oregon. Because remember, back in '92, California passed, at the same time they were having the conversation in Colorado, and you know, the vote in Colorado, California passed the most draconic anti-immigrant measures in history, called Proposition 187. And so that's why we said, well, we need to support the marchers. We need to be there because we're going to need help. And sure enough, I remember Julie Davis was the director of Basic Rights of Oregon, and I went to her and I said, look, man, we have 4 measures that we have to fight. And so we got together with a group of folks, and we formed a coalition. And a lot of the people that made up our coalition in our community were against us from having conversations, and against having the gay and lesbian community help us strategize. Because they all wanted us to go to California and learn from that strategy. But that was a losing strategy. They lost, right? So how are we gonna? And by that time we had already had a pretty solid relationship with ROP and with Basic Rights and other organizations. So we went and I presented the argument that we should not go to California. We should go with ROP. And we lost some coalition members that were faith-based because of that. And let them go, right? We don't need them, right? At the end of the day, we need people that are gonna fight, who are gonna struggle, right? And that's when you feel uncomfortable, when the position that you take is uncomfortable, that's when the best organizing happens, right? You know, that's that. You know, in radio, there's the best radio that happens is when you're in that gray area. You know, when you're about to violate FCC laws. That's where radio gets right. You know, I know Joanne. I seen Joanne here. I don't know if she's Joanne knows about this, right? 'Cause she's been in the front lines on that, right? So, you know. We lost those folks, but we still had about 80 people, 80 organizations. We lost about 3 or 4. And we strategized with them and came up with a beautiful strategy. And it started with the education process. We didn't know anything about electoral organizing. And Basic Rights did, right? Because they were, you know, they had just defeated Measure 9. You know, a lot of the folks are still around. And so I remember the meeting, and we strategized, and we came up with that strategy, an education strategy, an electoral strategy, a GOTV strategy. But we were able to carry, in order to do the GOTV, we gotta have an education. We have to do the education work. So we did, and so we visited 35 cities first. And in each city that we went to, we met with the Latinx community, but we also met with the NOAA 9 community, right? You know, and so by the time we got to July, you know, when all the ballot measures, when all the signatures had to be turned in, you know, we feel like it was through the help of Basic Rights that we were able to get our opposition not to get turned in enough signatures to put it on the ballot. So it was a victory for us, and a victory for the LGBT community. So I'm gonna stop here, but I just wanna say that that our relationships with Basic Rights has continued. I'm retired from Pecun. I retired about going on 3 years now. But before I left, I made sure that we had strong leadership in place, and that relationship is sacred to us, right? And that we had to not only that we had to protect that relationship, but we had to nourish it, right? We had to nourish that relationship because the attacks are going to continue, right? And sure enough, so moving forward, I just want to say that it was an honor to be part of that struggle. There's a lot more stories, but you know, with this limited time that we have, I just wanted to get the essence of what took place, right? And the organizing that went into that, you know, was really important. And when we have a conversation, we'll probably surface some more ideas and strategies that came out of that struggle. So thank you very much.
Well, I'm going to throw out the pages I wrote on Saturday. Just listening, I've had so many sparks in my memories have been popping up. And there are probably among us several thousand stories we could tell about being soldiers in the fight against ballot measurement. When I first read the measure, I had planned to go visit a friend in California. And I called and said, I cannot come. And she said, what's up? I said, I have to stay here. I just read this ballot measure. And I read it to her. And I said, this is first step, visible step toward fascism. That was my response. It was immediate. And I watched it roll out just since then. I was not a person who was like really out. I was kind of out. Everybody who needed to know knew. And I didn't discuss it publicly. What I did next was go to several friends of mine who were straight friends and say, I'm going to come out. And next week I'm going to be on the cover of Just Out magazine, and this is what I want you to do. Anybody who comes to you with any BS, tell them I'm the same person that I was the week before. And that I'm still fighting for everybody's rights. And all of those people said, you got it. One guy actually cried. He said, I didn't know. And I said, yeah, well, I never told you. He says, I'll do it. I'm here. So reading the measure told me that what was going to be happening was we were not going to be human beings anymore under the law. We'd still be human beings, but the law would say we're not human beings. And I want to reemphasize that laws are there, but they are not necessarily permanent. And that is a part of the vigilance that we must maintain over our environment and our lawmakers to ensure that they're not turned around. And you can see what happens if things change. And you've just seen some things change. And that recent change with the Supreme Court has implications for civil rights for all of us. So right now, it's really important that we all start talking about how we all work together. The next thing that happened is I went to Eugene to that meeting that Scott describes in his part of the history. And I was there in this dark basement, in a gay bar basement, and I heard pretty interesting ideas. But what struck me was when the election for people to be on the steering committee happened, and instead of the one token, there were like 4 or 5 of us who were elected to be on that committee. And I thought, you know, these people don't know whether I can run a campaign or ever saw a campaign before. But what they want is diversity. And I believed that they wanted it. We got it diluted down over time, and I'm going to talk about race in just a minute, or my experience with race on the steering committee. And I haven't talked like in public about it a lot. I've talked to friends about it. When we got to the place where we were starting to work, and well, Scott says this, first of all. Remember that the meeting in Eugene established the original steering committee with 7 people of color. And Scott writes that people who were nominated and elected were himself, Kathy Siemens, among the people elected, myself, and 2 Latinx members, both of whom left the committee. But that night, there was the air of, we want you all here, we want you all to represent the communities that you come from. And when we got to the place where the committee was finally formulated, there were hardly any people of color on the committee, so I was there. And I'll talk about that experience. And I'm going to tell you about an ethical dilemma I experienced on that committee. Not long after the committee was formed, and at least one of the people had quit already because of the feelings of racism on the committee, I got a couple of calls. Now, I remember I had just come out of Gretchen Kafori's office, or had worked for Neil Goldsmith at the state level, and so had some cachet. And I got a couple of people calling me saying, is this a good committee? Can we trust them? Can we give them our money? And the first time I responded, I was very hesitant because I had a question in my own mind. Should I say there are problems with race here and blow it all to hell, create chaos, confusion, and not move things forward? Or should I just say, we can do this? And what I ended up saying was, yeah, we can do this. This is an okay committee. You can give your money. I don't know that I would make the same decision today, but I don't know that I wouldn't. Because it is probably the biggest ethical dilemma I ever had in my life. And staying was not easy. I was disrespected. I was ignored. I was not heard when I spoke about no African American presence in this campaign. Where are the people of color? Where are the other folks? We're not hearing them. That's when I went out and called together, I think initially it was Avel and Margaret. And then we put together a letter and sent out to a bunch of people, and we formed African Americans Voting No on 9. the efforts were funded by Western States. Jeff Malachowski, who started Western States, came and said, hey, you guys need money for ads? And I said, yeah. So, anyway, we got that group going, which was a loyal group that was determined to stay where they were. They were public about where they were involved. They met every, I don't know, month or so, week, I don't remember. I don't do numbers and dates. But there was a consistent 17 people present out of the first 20 who came. And I thought that remarkable. And people did what they said they were going to do. Okay, back to the campaign. One of the things I pointed out was the language that the OCA was using was the language that was racist. It implied things that had to do with special rights and how you could tie that back to the ideas of affirmative action. Campaign ignored me. That mattered for a while, but then, and I thought about quitting, and I talked about it with another friend who said, don't quit. Use your position on the committee as one of authority. Stay with it. So then I began to go into public and make jokes about whether or not there was going to be an affirmative action plan for gay and lesbian people. And if I slept with somebody, if I slept with a man twice, did that make me lose my job under affirmative action? And who's going to watch me? And people started to laugh. And they released that idea that it was practical to have a plan that required such surveillance over the acts of individuals. I was ignored at a public meeting by a few people on the committee. I came into the room, I said hello, and I simply not responded to them. This was in Packwood's office. So I went to the other side of the room, and I yelled their names and said, hi, how are you? And I made them speak. And I got back to the meeting, and I said, I feel disrespected. And somebody said, are you implying? And I said, I'm not implying a damn thing. I'm telling you what I saw and what I felt. Didn't seem to matter a whole lot. But what I was able to do in spite of all that was keep on. And some of that, and I want to refer to something else I haven't done publicly, was because I kept getting these nice little cards from somebody anonymously saying, we know what's happening to you. Keep on. We're here. We're thinking about you. We care about you. And that turned out to be, I think it was Linda Shirley then, but it's Jack Danger now. And she's sitting over there. And I didn't find out until later who it was. But it meant a lot to have support from people who cared about what was happening and let you know. So I'm telling you things that you need to keep in mind because we're coming to a hard time, folks. And if you haven't paid attention, if you're not, nervous about that, you're not paying attention. Pay attention. We're coming up on some hard times, and we need each other, and we need to talk to each other, and we need to support each other individually and organizationally. One of the things that kept happening on the committee was I had a guy who would just every time I tried to talk, he tried to cut me off, and then he'd distort my words. And one evening after a meeting, Jeff and I were having pizza, and he said, what's going on with you and him? And why are you getting so much flack from him? And I said, this is called racism and sexism. So the next meeting, as I've been cut off again and misrepresented in what I have said, Jeff said, that is not what Kathleen said. And there was this big pause. And Jeff said it again. That is not what Kathleen said. And he did that a couple of times during the meeting of the dynamic change. Be an ally. Be a friend. Be that person who helps the person who's being discriminated against, people are trying to put down. Be that person. I was so glad he heard me when I said it. He didn't question me. He didn't say, oh no, you must be wrong. He didn't say, oh, you're kidding, that couldn't happen in our group. He said, I see it. Yeah. So the experience on being on the committee was not peaches and cream. It was not easy. I went home a lot of nights and I cried. But the experience of fighting for myself and for my community and for my people, and to involve other people and talk to other people, was wondrous. What it did for me was build confidence and courage. And it made me pay attention to how I operate in the world. That is, to pay a lot of attention to what it is I say and do, and to keep my mouth shut a lot. Because a lot of times you want to say things and you're glib, and then all of a sudden it doesn't come out right. Keep your mouth shut. Think about it. I want to say something else about, we were talking earlier about the flag. We have relinquished our hold on the flag. And I watched that start in the 60s when I refused to say the Pledge of Allegiance. And I got a job that meant, you better think this through. If you're going to keep this job, you're going to stand up and you want to do something in this job that changes the status of people of color in this country. If you want to do that, you're going to have to stand up and you're going to have to sing the Star-Spangled Banner. And so I did. And then I began to think about it. My daddy went to World War II. He was in Guam. He was overseas. He could have been killed. That's my flag. I think we should reclaim it. I think we should reclaim it. This 4th of July, we had our flag out. We had a rainbow bow on the door and a Black Lives Matter sign in the window. Now, is that American? Hallelujah. Remember that when you come to this question of race, the people who have been pushing the hardest on the issues of democracy are the brown and black people in this country. The women, the disenfranchised, have been pushing the hardest. And what we need to do for the future is gather us together, all of us, all colors, all that. And the gay and lesbian community has got everybody in it. You name a category that's been disenfranchised. We're still here. We're in there. Let's get together. Let's figure it out. Let's listen more, because what I felt when I said the OCA is using the language of, the right, racism, we could have done a little tweaking in how we presented things or how we engaged people, and it might have helped. And it might have helped build some alliances. We don't know now, but we need to think about it now. We need to think about it going forward. I really want people to talk to other people a lot. Talking about going into the future, we need to talk to people who were not born at the time that Measure 9 happened. We need to invite them to explore some of the ideas and some of the history that's different from. Back in, I guess it was the late 60s, early 70s, did you know that Huey Newton wrote a piece about maybe gay people were the most oppressed in the country? I don't know. Do you know who Huey Newton was? I don't know how old you are. The Black Panther. So mostly what I want us to think about is what we can do to survive what is coming, to understand that fear is not a reason for inaction. Fear is not a reason for inaction. Fear is not a reason for inaction. As Scott and I were about to go on the stage to speak downtown Portland, Scott Nakagawa and I looked at him and I said, "Do you ever think this might be the day?" I didn't have to say anything more than that. He said, "Yes, I do." Because every time I stepped out on that podium, that stage, whatever, I thought, you're the biggest, blackest thing on the stage. You're an easy target. Fear is not a reason for inaction. That's all I want to say.
An injury to one is an injury to all. I want to remind folks, we're going to go into a little bit of the Q&A. So you see folks on the corner here with these pads. If you've got a question brewing in your mind, just a couple that we've already got here, I'm sure are going to stimulate some conversation here with our panelists. But if there's something that's burning on your mind that you want to ask, just raise your hand and then we'll come and find you. And I think, Ms. Kathleen, you gave us an amazing segue to one of our first questions, and that is, if you could sit down and talk to a member of the younger generation, and what would you want them to remember from your activism and fight? What is the thing that you really believe they need to take forward in these very perilous times? And that's for all of y'all.
Me?
I'm not asking all of you, but I think what you said at the end really just hit it home.
Well, I'll answer part of that.
Okay.
Name calling doesn't get you anywhere. That self-righteousness doesn't get you anywhere. And that if you really love what you're trying to do, then you will show as much love as possible in your situation.
Yeah, the thing that I would say is that we can't do this on we're gonna win back our democracy on our own. That it's gonna take all of us, and so I think that it's important to honor diversity. I think it's important to understand people's history, and I think it's important that we all get together as often as we can, even if it's to break bread together and share each other's stories, because that's in the little time that in 1992 that we spent, must have been about a few hours. We learned a lot in that exchange, and we appreciated, and we broke down those barriers of misunderstanding, and I think we truly walked away with a sense that we could make it happen, that we could defeat Measure 9, that we could create unity, that this has been done by our brothers and sisters in the past, and I think that coming together as a community on a regular basis is really important. But I think that trust, the trust needs to be built. And that understanding that we have in our shared history needs to be understood, right? So once in a while I'd get a call from a member of the people that worked on Measure 9, ROP, Basic Rights, and even the other organizations that we've had relationships with. And they would call me and it says, there's this famous call that I got. And that call was it was a deep Southern voice. It goes, Ramon, you might not know me, right? But my name is Hank Sanders. And I'm a state senator from the great state of Alabama. And I want you and the rest of your people, he was meaning immigrants in the country, to come down to Alabama, because we're going to use that iconic march that we do every year from Selma, Alabama to Montgomery. And we're going to honor your people for your contributions to America, right? You know, I didn't tell them, well, I got to look at my calendar. You know, I said, yes, sir, we'll be there. How many people? Bring everybody. So we showed up 10,000 strong. So that's what I'm talking about. Why? Why? Because I understand the history and the sacrifices that our brothers and sisters went through when they got their asses beat in the Edmund Pettus Bridge, right? That's in our DNA, right? So, you know, that's what I'm talking about. So when I got a call from Jeannie when she was with Basic Rights of Oregon, you know, I didn't tell her I got to look at my calendar. I said when and where, right? And our people will be there, because we understand the importance of what an alliance, what is an alliance, and what is building community look like, right? But we can't get there if we don't understand each other, right? And that's why I think that when farm workers make that call that they need people supporting a strike, or they need people in a picket line, or if they need people marching, that you all need to be there, right? Just like we were in '92, and that we continue to do that every year, right? You know, I might not be there, you know, but the leadership of Pecun and of the farm worker movement will be there, and has been there, because we have that shared understanding, we have that shared history, and you know, we've built in the work of the gay and lesbian communities, at least in the organized sector, you know, people understand the importance of maintaining this relationship and nourishing it, right? And that's what I just had a meeting on Monday, a week ago tomorrow, with the staff, and what I talked about was we showed a video called Aumento Ya. It was a struggle, the 10th anniversary of Pecun, right? Instead of having a big party, we had the largest organizing effort in the history of Oregon agriculture, right? And we had 240 volunteers that led 4 major strikes and a dozen other wildcat strikes, which involved thousands and thousands of farm workers, and we were able to raise the wages in the strawberry industry, right? And when that strike happened, right, a number of you were there, right? A number of you were there, right? Because back in '92, we had put the question to you, right? This is our history, right? This is our community, you know, and you all responded beautifully. I mean, I can't, you know, you need to see that video, right? And see yourselves in that video, right? Supporting farm workers. And that's what it's about, right? But like I say, you know, if you're going to travel down the road 1,000 miles, it takes the first step. And that first step can be as basic as breaking bread together, right? Y'all understand that, right? All right, thank you. '95.
What I would say to younger folks is, don't let us tell you you can't do that. We're too scared. That's not been done before. we don't understand you. Please just tell us to shut up nicely. So if you can, at the same time, remember the shoulders you're standing on and these folks, at the same time that you go, yes, and we're going to do something that you're uncomfortable with. I had that experience when we had my partner and I had the privilege of making a documentary film called Paper Stories of Undocumented Youth. And we made the film, and then the young folks in the movement kept telling me, after the film came out, we're gonna do more stuff and you need to come film it. And I didn't look at my calendar. I went, and they committed civil disobedience. They certainly risked not just arrest, but deportation. All of the immigration attorneys were saying, don't tell anyone you're undocumented. And they told me that they were gonna do a Coming Out of the Shadows event in Chicago. It was the first time. And they got on a stage earlier, just a couple hours earlier, there were mounted police dogs, ICE vans, and they were gonna get on this stage and say, my name is, and I'm undocumented. And I was just there to witness it. I was shaking, I didn't know what was gonna happen. By the time the march came and they came to the stage, it was police on bicycles, not with dogs. And they came out as undocumented, and then 8 of them, and I got to interview them after. And one extraordinary thing, talk about building movements, building on movements, as I interviewed each of them, they told me who their heroes were. And they were Harvey Milk and MLK. And then they said, and I'm queer. 7 of 8 of those folks were queer. They knew about the value of coming out. And then when we saw the undocumented youth movement balloon from that in 2010, they came out. That's how they won DACA. I think that's how we won the fight against 9. You had people wearing buttons. It was gonna say this triangle, or it was gonna say straight but not narrow. There was no middle. And it was all about coming out. And so anyway, people don't listen to us, but listen to us. That's
I would add that, and I saw this when I was teaching at Portland State, how many of the youth were really connected to their phones all the time, and that it was important to have a face-to-face contact with somebody. I mean, even now when I see my Fern back there, is texting her nephew, and I'm going like, why don't you just call him? But so it is hard though to step out of your bubble of safety when you're with your friends to go meet somebody new. I don't hardly even know how you do that, to find somebody. I can give you this one example of when I was doing my thesis, but then I was by myself, and the man in this family that had moved in next door to me was a minister, and it never occurred to me to ask what kind of minister, And I don't know whether he knew I was gay or not, but when I was doing my thesis, I had borrowed a monitor from work, and it was like, what is that smell? And my monitor was smoking, like it was burning. So I unplugged it and carried it outside and dumped it on our driveway, and then Scott came out from next door and he goes, what's that smell? And it's like, it's plastic burning. And so I told him what I was doing on my thesis and that I was gay, and then he said that he was a minister, and I said, yes, I know, and then he goes, for the Foursquare Church. And if the folks who don't know, that's a very, very conservative, anti-gay church. And the fact that we were living right next door to each other, but immediately this wall went up. I was like afraid of him, kind of, that yet it was kind of a weird moment because we were neighbors. And then we were still getting along and everything was fine until I met Fern. And then then they saw me with another woman, and then it was like, you know, when Fred and I ended up getting a house and moving in together, I did get a letter from Scott's wife, which I regret not saving, but it was all about, you know, how I was going to rot in hell, and it was really bad, and what was I doing, and, you know, just, I guess I'm off subject, but.
No.
Okay.
It's all on subject.
Okay, all right, that's done.
All right, we got one kind of deep cut question here but I think it's interesting, especially hearing a little bit of what you were talking about with what presence looked like with undocumented youth. And that is from someone who's worked with some of our queer elders. There's a perception that there was a more peaceful coexistence with law enforcement back in those days than there is now. Can any of you speak to that and how you've seen, is that true? Or what does that, when you perceive what's going on today, especially with marginalized groups and the relationship with law enforcement, what are your thoughts around that?
I defer to the people of color on this question.
Well, I can only speak like that. My experience with law enforcement has been very negative. You know, as a Latino youth, I got beat up, I got jailed for just being brown. I recently testified on a bill that was being put forth by Unite of Oregon against racial profiling. And when I testified, I told the Senate hearing, as a Senate committee, that I had been stopped 35 times and never got issued an infraction, you know. And it was always because it was Latinx. They were looking for that I didn't have a driver's license, I didn't have insurance, or I had a warrant, right? Or I had a gun in my car, right? 35 times, and I've never gotten an infraction, right? Oh, your driver's license, your driver's plates, is crooked. Your back light is out, right? And then when I couldn't get off the car because he would arrest me, you know. And then I later found out that Lou Fredericks, who was a state senator, had a similar experience. I had it like 35 times. He's got it like 40 times, right? He got stopped 40 times. You know, I got stopped mainly in the rural area, in the rural communities, right? You know, in my hometown, we have like 12 different police agencies working our community. FBI, DEA, Immigration, you know, Border Patrol, ICE, Marion County, local police, right? And then we have interagency task force and the county sheriffs, right? All those police agencies are working our community day in and day out, right? You know, that's a military zone. We live in a community that is in a warfare, right? When you have so many law enforcement agencies trying to outnumber each other, trying to outdo each other, you know, and I'll tell you that I've had horror stories about, you know, families being separated from their parents. Parents kissing their kids in the morning says, you know what, son, or you know what, daughter, I might not see you today, because I might get deported, right? What's that all about, right? Is that the kind of a society that we're trying to build? Is that where we've gotten to, right? You know, you know, part of like my upbringing and how I went from a straight heterosexual to a gay rights activist was when I seen a young Latino being beat up by a skinhead, 3 of them. And I picked up that person, and I told that person, wait here for the cops. And he goes, no, man, they get me out of here. And I said, well, can I take you to the hospital at least, to get, you're bleeding. He goes, no, I don't want to go to the hospital. Well, let me take you home. No, my parents won't accept. So I ended up taking him to a friend's house. But can you imagine how traumatized that person was? Just because he was a queer. He was a human being. And the thing that bothered me the most is that he looked like my little brother. And that was a long-lasting moment in my life. And that's how I became an activist, right? And I said, no, I gotta make a stand here. I gotta be for the rights of everybody, right? And so, I hope I didn't bogart the answer, but for me, I've been a victim of police repression. And, and I could, I have learned how to cope with that, but I still have trauma. I'm still traumatized by that experience, being a Latino, Latinx person, especially living in the hood.
So I don't have the same experience, and I think that my brothers, all the men of color, are much more vulnerable in a lot of ways than I am. But I have had the same fears of being stopped, especially when I was working for state government and got to drive around the state knowing that I was vulnerable. But more than that, I want to say, pay attention to how you talk to. Pay attention to what people do. They say, let us restore the trust. There are communities where there's never been any trust. So instead of saying let's restore the trust, I say let's build trust. There was no good feeling between police and especially black young men in this country, period. When? So pay attention to how it's being handled around you and how it's being talked about, as though once upon a time we were all living happily. Yeah. Down on the plantation and, hey, pay attention to what's being said to you, because there's not been that trust. It's hard to establish that trust, especially when the people who are harassing people of color are often afraid of those people, and I think that's why we get shot. They're afraid. They assign to you powers that you do not have, and they shoot you when you're running away from them. So that's a myth about it's better, or it used to be better. It's just more visible now because we got cameras on every phone, and everybody's got a phone.
All right, y'all heard here that history has been corrected. Thank you both for passionately and thoroughly correcting that perception.
I think that one of the reasons that the question even comes up is because prior to Tom and Katie Potter, Katie I hear is here, that was such a big deal that they walked in the Pride Parade, that it was such a big deal that police participated, is because not very long before that, men were getting busted at Laurelhurst Park for looking for a date. That it was so bad before that, and so that police would publicly in a uniform say, I'm with you, was mind-blowing. When we did the walk, similar to my attitude about why won't the Catholic Church support me? I innocently was like, well, we'll just tell the state and local police where we are at all times. It turned out to be good. Because we certainly didn't want to surprise them. We did have a few moments when they came in to a building that we were sleeping in because they thought someone was breaking in Junction City, Oregon. But we did find some extraordinary allies at that time, when in that context, it was really brave to be in a military uniform, to be in a police uniform, and to speak out for queer rights.
All right, our final question for y'all, and I love the fact that you, Ramon, spoke to something being in your DNA. How can a young person process burnout, intergenerational trauma, and then use their visibility to continue to fight, but also remain humble? So how do you maintain as a person coming into the fight, all the intergenerational trauma that you've experienced, burnout, and as you rise toward leadership, how do you stay humble?
Are you humble?
I try to be.
Yeah, that's a very difficult question. But I have to say that, several years ago, the leadership of Pekun decided that we were going to go through a generational shift, and that we were going to turn over the organization and the movement to young people, and that was like 10 years before we left our positions, the leadership, and so we had to we had to like create a different set of systems, for lack of a word, or a process, so that we could transfer all that information that we had, right, and turn it over to a younger generation. So all the youth in power right now in Pekun, our president and executive director is a woman. She's the first woman leader of a farm worker union in the history of the United States. She's 35 years old, and her name is Leila Lopez. We've had most of our leaders in the movement today are probably in their mid to late 30s, right? So we're talking about that age, right? And so some of the most difficult parts of that is that they're standing on shoulders, and they need to they need to emulate like some of the core values and the principles that we've shared with them, right? They got to do it on their own, right? And that's where leadership is built, is when young people are given the opportunity to strategize, become critical thinkers, and do stuff on their own, right? Even if we disagree with some of the decisions they make, because eventually they'll fall or they'll commit errors, right? And so they'll learn from those mistakes, right? And so the best leaders come from movements where they have fallen, gotten up, and continue to work, but they learn from those mistakes. So we have to teach basic values like honesty, right? We have to, teach people how to be critical thinkers, right? And how to think, sort of like outside the box. We have to teach people about diversity. We have to teach, when I talk about diversity, I'm talking about that we have to respect and understand the history of the peoples that we're working with, right? So for example, in the Latinx community in the valley, in the Willamette Valley, we have tons of indigenous folks from Guatemala, from southern Mexico. We have, in Woodburn, where I live, we have 16 different languages that we have to deal with. The last organizer that we hired, because we have a huge population of new immigrants coming from Guatemala, is a person that speaks Canhoban, right? That wouldn't have happened, a few years ago, but anyway, we have to respect, we have to re-educate people about the history of farm workers, right? Because the history of farm workers did not start off when Dolores Huerta or when Cesar Chavez started organizing. It was way before that, right? The people that led the farm workers back then were people like Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman, who fought against slavery. Those are our heroes, right? Those are the first farm worker organizers, right? The people that led the fight against sharecropping, for example, right? That fooled people to believe that they were owning their land and their crops, right? You know, it was just another way of economic slavery against black folk, right? So we teach our people that. We teach our, you know, in terms of LGBTQ, right? We've hired, you know, gay and lesbian folks in Pecum, so that we have a shared vision of shared common reality of what's it like to be a queer person in the farm worker movement, and what are the challenges. Like I said before, you know, we have a whole lot of young people in our community that are gay and lesbian and trans, right? You know, and I'm not afraid to say this, and I'm proud that my son, you know, and my wife's here with me, Selena Ramirez, and our son, our oldest son, he's a gay person, you know, and I'm proud of that. And so, but and you know, the first thing, you know, we have to teach our people, and I think Kathleen, you hit it on the nail, is not be afraid, right? Because fear can destroy a movement. Fear can destroy a person, right? And you know, so we need to break down the barriers of fear. We have to teach people and arm people how to fight back, right? We got to give them the tools to fight back and be proud of who you are, right? Be proud, right? And so I think those are some of the basic skills that we need to teach our young people. But most importantly, we have to talk the talk, right? It's not enough to speak about it, but we have to put it into action, right? Because it won't work, right? So that's why ally building is really important. Another important is sending gay folks to go and meet the farm workers, right? Go visit the labor camps. You know, go to the black organizations, go to the reservations, right, and learn, right, and talk about how do we build this unity. Because here, especially in the Northwest, if we don't do that, we're giving rise to a right wing that is going to be more powerful and more organized, right? And so we need to counter that by building our own unity, you know, a united front against, like you say, Kathleen, fascism, right? ¿Se puede?
Sí,
Sí, se puede. Yes, it can be done. Thank you.
I'm going to try to answer at least part of this question. On the intergenerational stuff, you know, I had 3 brothers, all of whom were younger than I. And I was talking to my baby brother, and I said, you need to do blah, blah, blah. He said, you think you can always tell me what to do? And we're both grown. And I said, your problem is you think you have to do it. For me, as I became older, in terms of that response to the generational difference, was to say, thank you, or I'll think about it. But not feel obligated to do, as Ann said, what it is I suggested or instructed. On staying humble. First of all, I think you have to admit that you have an ego. Just, you got an ego. And if you don't have an ego, you wouldn't be trying to change the world. You must think you can do it. Or you can add to it some kind of way. So you have an ego. Embrace it. It gives you strength. And then look to see where it gets in the way of what you are doing. Because I have that struggle, it's like, your ego's in the way, you need to move that. You need to move that out of the way so you can see better and not have your feelings hurt. So I think it's really important to staying humble. I'm not sure. I'm not sure about what that really means. But if it means staying the conduit for the ideas that come to you, because that's how I see my role. I didn't generate all this stuff, good or bad. I'm a conduit. I have a couple of gifts. One is to be able to say things. And my job then is to funnel this stuff in through my ears and mix it up and translate it into the language of the policymakers or the bureaucracy or whatever is standing before me. That's my job. It's not to pretend that I created it or that I had all these ideas, because I didn't. I listened. And that is part of what makes me know I can get here by myself. You know my name, but I can get here. I didn't do it all by myself. I didn't create it. And there are hundreds and hundreds of people who contribute to all that we do. And I think that's part of staying humble, if you will. Recognizing that you're part of a big conglomerate of people and ideas and feelings and experiences and history, and trying to sift that out so the world can use it.
I just want to say that obviously I didn't do this walk by myself. I had the gall to think that people would join me, which was pretty nuts. And there's so many people right here tonight who helped work on this. Lauren Silvis is here. She went on the route with me to personally see how accessible it would be every step of the way, every roll of the way for a person who was in a wheelchair. So thank you to Lauren. Cecil Prescott is here. He was there the night that we were doing a nonviolence training, which kept us centered and grounded, and we knew what we were going to do when the shit went down, which it did do. Thank you, Cecil. Kristen Aspen is here, who backed this idea up from the very beginning. You are just righteous and awesome, and Jana, thank you. Who all was involved with the walk? Who is here tonight? You were. You lent us your car, didn't you? No. We had a person lend us their car. It was involved in a 3-car accident and got totaled. So be careful if I ever ask you for something, because I'm not sure if I'll ever be able to give it back. I think one thing, many hundreds of people made this happen. It was just part of the campaign against 9, and they did continue. Ramon has mentioned some of the people who we've lost, and I do want to remember them, and I think we'll have time to remember them tonight. But there was a man in his 80s who joined us on the walk for a few days, named Isidore Wolf. He didn't feel well after a couple of days, and he went home and he died of a heart attack. And I feel like his last days were days that were spent working for justice and walking for justice. And I did go to his memorial. I felt so lucky. I was worried what the family would say to me, but they had out all of his political buttons from decades and decades of doing this work. And his son basically said, he did what he wanted to do in his last days. He did die doing what he loved. So I want us to remember the people we don't have anymore. And I don't want to have the last word though. Kathleen, will you please have the last word?
What am I having the last word about?
If
I'll
someone
ask
would
you a
like to have
question.
the last word, We can do that, but I will give you a little bit of a preview of what's coming next before, we did ask our panelists to consider if there was one idea they'd like to leave folks with. We want to make a little time for that. But after that moment, if you haven't yet seen, we will be having a little protest song moment with Never Turning Back. So there's probably one on a seat, or you might be sitting on one right now. We want to do a couple thank yous before we head into that moment. First of all, of course, for our panelists and for Holly for sharing so much. Let's give them some love. All of the volunteers at Glappin who put this amazing event together, and I'm hoping that you'll be joining me for a mere $35 to become a member this year and help them reach their match. And also this amazing display that was created in partnership with Glappin and the Rural Organizing Project. If you haven't had a chance to look at it yet, please take some time. As we said a little bit earlier, or as Ann had alluded to a little bit earlier, we are asking folks who were part of this movement, who would want to remember and honor folks who may not be here with us anymore. There's a large roll of paper over here with different colored markers. We ask for folks to please put remembrances of names that you'd like to honor. It's a moment just to acknowledge them and put them on something that can be permanent in the archives. And on that note, our panelists have had a moment to think, what's a sentence or two you would like to leave these folks with as they head out of here tonight?
To all the luck in the world, that you continue that struggle, that at least that we left you and some examples that you can use, so that you can use those tools to continue this important work, and not only in protecting our democracy, but moving it forward. Thank you.
I came here because this was about what we learned. So now we've talked about what we learned and some other stuff. And it doesn't do much good unless we use it. So I want to say I hope that everyone goes from here with some ideas to share with someone else, to talk about what is coming and what we can do to resist and prevail. That's what I want to see. I want to see people go out and ask the people you talk to talk to other people and prepare ourselves. Prepare ourselves to join hands and don't let go.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And so happy to say that this will be part of the archives. Thanks to our video crew over here. We will be making this available for folks to see who weren't able to attend tonight, or who just want to watch it again, because y'all got some pearls dropped before you. And of course, helping us make this accessible, we do want to say also thank you to Sabrina, our ASL interpreter. For those of you who already know it, please join in with me. And if not, hopefully after the first verse, it will feel familiar enough to you. Never turning back. Maybe the next time you're at a protest, you'll sing this song. Gonna keep on moving forward. Keep on moving forward. Keep on moving forward. Never turning back, never turning back. Gonna keep on walking proudly, keep on walking proudly, keep on walking proudly. Never turning back, never turning back. Gonna keep on singing loudly, keep on singing loudly, keep on singing loudly, never turning back, never turning back. Gonna keep on loving boldly, keep on loving boldly, keep on loving boldly, never turning back, never turning back. Gonna keep on moving forward, keep on moving forward, keep on moving forward, never turning back, never turning back. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, Howard.
Trying to remember what year it was discovered, because I don't know if you remember, I was out there. And I remember